I have lived for more than 17 years outside the United States, studying and working in countries such as Japan, China, India, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Cambodia, Jordan, and others. I've worked very closely with local and national parliaments, national police, ministries of justice, Supreme Courts, and educational institutions. I'd like to share with you one conclusion I've come to over the years, and that conclusion is this. The Japan-U.S. bilateral relationship is the most important relationship of the 21st century. We Americans put ourselves at risk if we fail to recognize this and if we fail to strengthen our relationship with Japan. Why is Japan so important to the United States? Well, we first have to appreciate the fact that even as the world's sole superpower, we need allies, and we need stronger, deeper bonds with those allies, considering that the United States is in decline. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. Domestically, for example, the average U.S. citizen in their 30s today is much less well off than their parents when they were in their 30s. This decline is likely to increase in the future for U.S. citizens now in their 20s. Unlike the 10-year Great Depression, which began in 1929, for the first time in our 200-plus years of history, Americans are experiencing a slow but steady, long-term, multi-generational, accelerating decline in prosperity. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, these unfortunate economic trends have been in motion for many decades now. And internationally, the United States is in decline. Today, we are the world's largest economy. In about 5 years, we will be the world's second largest economy. And about 35 years after that, we will be the world's third largest economy. As our economic power weakens, our influence in the world weakens. Allies are becoming more important than ever. Our democratic way of life is not guaranteed for the future. Only 12% of the world's population lives in countries that are full democracies, such as the United States and Japan. A democracy is fragile and in a constant struggle to survive against many other forces which influence the world. Let's take a look at just one example of those other forces, Communist China. We do a lot of trade with China, and China has a very rich history. When I was a scholar with Harvard's International Honors Program, I studied in China and enjoyed the people's friendship and ancient culture. But is Communist China, the government, a threat to the democratic ideals of our United States? Communist China invaded Tibet and destroyed almost all their places of worship, and they continue to select its own Buddhist priests as a way of controlling and slowly eliminating their religion. As the much-revered founding father of Communist China, Mao Zedong, stated, "Religion is poison." Can you imagine if your religious leader at your place of worship was arrested and replaced by someone selected by politicians in Washington, D.C.? What else is Communist China doing today? For one, they're constantly hacking into our institutions which exercise their right to freedom of the press, such as the New York Times. Many invasions have been traced back to this building in Shanghai, which is owned by the Chinese military. Communist China's national development program relies on industrial espionage, such as stealing corporate secrets not just by internet hacking, but by Chinese agents here in the United States. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce reported in 2013 that $300 billion of intellectual property is stolen from us, the United States, every year. And I can tell you that China is absolutely at the very forefront of these thefts. It gets worse. Listen to what Michelle Von Cleve had to say. She was the head of U.S. counterintelligence from 2003 to 2006. She said, quote, "One example, the Chinese, by espionage, acquired all of the design information of U.S. nuclear weapons currently in our inventory." End quote. Keep in mind that China is, among major world powers, the best friend of the Islamic-based government of Iran, which wishes to develop nuclear weapons, and the absolutely insane government of North Korea, which now has nuclear weapons. In fact, without China, North Korea would not even exist. That's what the Korean War was all about. Unfortunately, it gets worse than this. This is the F-35, our next-generation combat aircraft. It can perform as a fighter or bomber and has advanced electronic warfare capabilities. It is a stealth aircraft with the option of vertical takeoff and landing. The F-35 is going to cost us at least $1.5 trillion. It is the most expensive weapons program in the world ever, and if we lose the advantage of the F-35, there is no alternative, no other next-generation aircraft to rely on. If a single military weapons program is central to the safety of the United States, this is it. Some years ago, thousands of blueprints and technical information for the F-35 were stolen. Thereafter, China unveiled its next generation of combat aircraft, the J-31. Communist China has also stolen details of our Black Hawk weapons program, Osprey weapons program, our drone programs, and dozens of others. It is true that currently the United States is the world's largest economy and has the strongest military, but that's going to change. Everyone has their own projection, but the very clear consensus is this: Communist China will overtake the United States as the world's largest economy, and this will occur 3 to 5 years from now. 5 to 15 years after that, the Chinese military will surpass that of the United States. No freedom of religion, speech, press, or representation. Industrial espionage costing us hundreds of billions of dollars. Theft of all our nuclear weapons design information. Theft of our most important combat programs. And friends of Iran and North Korea. This is what Communist China represents in part, and it is soon to become the world's largest economy and the world's most powerful military. All nations use their economic and military power simply by having it to influence the world beyond its borders, and what China represents and what the United States represents are two different things. Yes, of course we should continue fair trade with China, but the United States is more than just about making money, isn't it? God knows we're not perfect. That a scene like this exists in our country and is becoming more common is shameful. But ultimately, do we not constantly redefine ourselves as a nation and strive to refine and promote the principles of freedom and justice? Are those not the fundamental principles of humankind that thousands of years of human history have led us to today? Communism, terrorism, corruption outside and inside our own country, and so many other forces constantly threaten what we hold so sacred, freedom and justice. If you believe that these principles of humanity are worth protecting, then you must appreciate the need for the United States to strengthen its relationships with its democratic allies. Especially with the United States in decline, it's needed now more than ever. I propose to you that among our allies, Japan is the most important. Let's look at the facts. Fact number 1. Japan is a thriving democracy. The days of Japanese people ruled by a military dictatorship ended with the Second World War. Prior to and during the Second World War, the Japanese military dictatorship invaded China and Korea, took Indochina from the French, took Hong Kong from the British, took Indonesia from the Dutch, and took the Philippines from the United States. Many atrocities were committed, on par with the actions of Nazi Germany, the Armenian Genocide 20 years earlier, and American slavery 50 years before that. All dark days in human history. But today, Japan is a thriving democracy and has been for nearly 3/4 of a century. Based on the most recent elections, various independents and 10 different political parties represent the people of Japan in both the upper and lower houses of their Congress. Japan has had peaceful transitions of democratically elected government administrations for almost 70 consecutive years now. In Asia, where 60% of the world's people live, this is second only to Australia and New Zealand. They also enjoy full freedom of religion, full freedom of speech, and full freedom of the press. Fact number 2. Japan is a major world economic power. After the United States, these are the next 10 largest economies. You can see that Japan has the third largest economy in the world and the largest economy of all our allies. With economic power comes influence, and Japan and the United States, working in concert with each other, have a much better chance of seeing their democratic interests survive into the 22nd century. Fact number 3. Japan is a major world military power. After the United States, these are the next 10 military powers in terms of spending. You can see that Japan's military is as large as that of the United Kingdom and France. In terms of military spending as a percentage of the previous chart's GDP, we see that Japan spends a very small amount on its military, just 1% of its GDP. This tradition of a 1% cap on military spending was encouraged in the past by the Japanese people and by the government of the United States. There are now increased calls within Japan and the U.S. government for Japan to increase its military spending. Until other nations reduce their own spending to 1%, a Japanese increase in military spending is a very good idea and should be encouraged. If spending were to increase to just 2%, for example, still a smaller percentage than the other top 5 in this chart, Japan's ability to protect itself and to help its ally, the United States, is increased dramatically. Nevertheless, at just 1%, Japan's military is formidable. And finally, fact number 4. Japan is in Asia. More than half of the world lives in Asia, and more than half of the world's wealth and power will soon be in Asia. The strong democratic allies are needed in Asia, and Japan is the clear choice. Let's go back to our chart on economic power. Japan is the only ally listed here that's in Asia. India is a good friend, but we're strategic partners, which is basically a step down from an ally. And India is rife with corruption, and its level of democracy is not nearly as sophisticated as that of Japan. If we look at South Korea and Australia, our other excellent allies in Asia, we see that they simply don't match the economic power of Japan. So for today, right now, Japan is our strongest ally. Let's go back to our chart on military power. Again, Japan is the only ally listed here that is in Asia. And again, if we look at South Korea and Australia, they are excellent allies, but simply don't match the military power of Japan. So again, for today, right now, Japan is our strongest ally. It's fair to say that Great Britain was our greatest ally of the 20th century, and they will continue to be a close and important ally. But the critical ally for the United States in the 21st century is Japan, for its highly functioning democracy, its economic power, its military power, and its location, Asia. I am not suggesting our other allies are unimportant. We all need each other if democratic principles and freedom are to survive into the 22nd century. But we as Americans need to recognize the importance of Japan. We need them as much as they need us, and so far it's been a very one-sided relationship. The Japanese know a great deal about us and love the United States, but I'm embarrassed to say that my fellow citizens know very, very little about Japan. We cannot take this relationship for granted. Please watch the video Allies to understand the importance of Japan to the United States, and then take some time to learn about the Japanese people by watching the video Japan. You can find out how I'm riding horseback across our country by checking out the video Go West to Japan, and you can follow my horseback expedition by checking out the regularly updated content in Follow Me. I'm taking 2 years off from work for this trip. That's how much I believe in our relationship with Japan, and so of course donations are most welcome. If you're a teacher, check out the Educators section for curricula and student assignments. If you want to know more about me, check out Who Am I? And everyone is most welcome to contact me with questions, comments, or regarding anything else. For additional information on Japan, the media sources or statistics referenced in this website, and other information, check out links.